Hello, folks. Welcome back to Reality Check with Arvind Swaminathan. This is the second part of this Ukraine crisis, and I'm going to explain the reasons behind it. It didn't start today or a week ago or a year ago. The whole thing started almost 50 years ago, maybe 50 years ago, maybe 52 years. And this is something which most people miss. The present attempts at colonization by the US, UK, all goes back to that one decision. You see, around 1970 or 71, Nixon sent Kissinger to Saudi Arabia with this proposition. Now, they may have called it a proposition, but in fact, it was an open threat. The proposition was Saudi Arabia must sell crude oil in US dollars only, no other currency. In exchange for that, the US would guarantee the house, the Saudi royal family would remain there, they would protect them in every possible way, and they would continue to rule in Saudi Arabia. Now you understand here the beginnings of American dictatorship and the American empire. Because oil is such a commodity that everybody needs it, and to buy it, everybody now had to buy US dollars. Hence its value. Why is it so high priced? Along with this, Nixon did one other thing. He took the US dollar off the gold standard, which was a huge decision. Why? Now the dollar does not have any gold to back it. He doesn't need it. And this, when every other currency must have gold to back it? Does that make sense? Yes, only if you're American. Now you understand why I said American empire. And it is no less than that, let's be quite honest. Also in the previous edition, the first episode, I'd said they've never bombed or attacked a European country. There's a slight mistake there. They have only one, Serbia. If you remember during, I think, Clinton's time, Serbia was bombed for 78 days, no less. That's 2 months and 18 days. And then they carved Kosovo out of Serbia and gave it to illegal migrants from Albania. Why? Why did they attack Serbia? And why did they attack Libya and no recriminations? You see, so far we've heard of racism in the form of white Europeans, Africans, North Africans, South Americans or Latins, or mixed Latin races, Asians and the Chinese. They don't mind bombing, attacking them because they're not white Europeans. But why Serbia? This is where the extremism or the extreme racism comes into play. You see, West Europeans claim to be Latin Europeans and therefore superior. The Eastern Europeans, that include Serbia, Russia and a few other countries, are Slav or Slavic origin. Therefore, they're not to be classed in the same group. That is where the divide comes in. That is why they've always looked down on Russia, because they're Slavs, not Latins. Which means it's free to colonize them, loot them, and everything, every which way they can, just like any of the other colonies. They're not part of the elite. Western media has also played a very big part. It doesn't matter where it is. The modus operandi of Western Europe and the USA lately, I'm talking about lately means 50, 60, 70 years. First, if you want to remove somebody because he's not pliable enough to fall in with American line, first you demonize him, defame him thoroughly, make him look to be really evil. Then either sponsor a revolution inside to topple it, and get a more pliable person there, regime change, classic. Or, if they can't do that, attack him directly, take him out, and put somebody else there, as they did in Iraq and Libya. Now, this has been classic American policy, and they're still doing it. First, let us understand what is the American mindset. How do they go about whatever they do? Why do they do it? First of all, Americans believe that all the resources of the world are theirs. It doesn't belong to the people whose country they are in, but it belongs to America. And Western Europe believes the same thing. They did that for almost 500 years. And those colonial powers were basically European, Western European. First it was Spain and Portugal, and then it was the Netherlands, UK, and France. I don't think I need to go in to show you or tell you about the extent of those empires. Some of them were huge, like the British Empire. Now, what is happening today? All those powers are beginning to try and get those colonies back into their orbit so that they can go on with the old, very, very high lifestyles and make the Asian or the African or the North African or the Arab or the Latin American work for it. They just count the profits. They've been doing that for almost 500 years. They've forgotten how to work. They can't work. They don't know how to work. As we found in the UK. A lot of Polish workers went across from the EU as per EU regulations. They worked hard and they worked well. They learned quickly. Now, in the same place, when you send a local lad from Britain, he might turn up 2 days in a week, 3 days in a week, and what the Polish worker put out in 1 day, these two couldn't put out in a week. How can you expect an economy to function under those circumstances when the people have forgotten how to work or they never learned how to work? That is point number one. The second part of the American dream. Now please listen to this one carefully. They do not believe that war should come anywhere near the United States or North America. Wars are to be kept in Europe, Asia, Africa, South America, anywhere else, but nowhere near North America. Why? If it came to North America, they couldn't sell their weapons to both sides, which is how they make money. Billions of it. Now it's all in US dollars. Again, go back to that Nixon plan. Oil is to be sold in US dollars only. Now there are one or two other parts. Everybody must do what America tells them. What's good for America is good for everybody else. This is all, if you remember, Lil Abner. What's good for General Bull Moose is good for everybody else, including the USA. And here, the USA has taken the role of General Bull Moose. This is ingrained into their lifestyles. There is a fourth one. I'll come to that a bit later. Now, all these things have a certain plan attached. American presidents are not there long enough, nor are they administrators. And somebody behind the scenes is pulling all the strings. And those people are the ones who are doing all the planning, have been for over 150 years. There's only one such family, the Rothschilds. And they don't even live in America. The third thing is false flags. And the USA is famous for this. They do something horrible and blame a third party for it. Now, earlier I spoke to you about regime change. And the CIA is probably the worst terrorist organization this world has ever known. And it is owned, set up by, and financed by the government of the USA. And they're famous for false flags and regime change. They admit to the first one being an elected Prime Minister of Iran, Mossadegh, in 1953. He was defamed, dethroned, and eventually hanged. Does that seem familiar? How about Saddam Hussein? You see, people don't seem to understand, and this is where the Western media comes in. Anything decent the guys may have done for their countries is painted over as if it never happened. What people don't seem to understand is Gaddafi cared only for Libya and Libyans, i.e. the people of Libya. He didn't give a damn about Europe or the USA. This is something which the Americans in particular were very upset about. They hoped he would get in line and do exactly what the Americans said, which of course he wasn't going to do. And what did he do for Libya? All health care was free, from cradle to grave. Any country do that? Not even the UK's National Health Scheme is free. Anybody who's working pays for it every week with those stamps he puts on that card. All education was free. He brought water from the Sahara Desert into the Libyan cities' water supply. He also used that for irrigation. If you wanted to do agriculture, they gave you land, irrigation water, they gave you implements, seeds, fertilizers for about 2 or 3 years until you were on your feet. Anybody does that? Plus, every year, everybody who had a bank account would have between $800 and $1,000 put into his account from oil revenues. Anybody does that for his people? No. If you wanted to buy an apartment, his government gave you a 50% grant. The other 50% was an interest-free loan from the Libyan National Bank. Anybody give you a loan free of interest? No. And yet he was painted as something very evil or corrupt, doing nothing for Libyans. You see, what the West doesn't understand is most of these Muslim communities do not understand democracy at all. They need a dictator. Like Saddam Hussein, he kept Iraq for Iraqis. They needed a firm hand to put them in their place to work and not fool around. Now, the Americans have one other problem, and most Western countries also have this. Freedom does not mean under the American jackboot. Freedom means the right to choose your own way in life. It's about time those guys understood this and behaved as such. Nobody likes any jackboot on top of them, least of all American. Because that means America takes all the money and all the profits, and all we get is wages. How does that help us? It doesn't. Now you notice that pattern. And everybody is saying Russia is wrong to go into Ukraine. When the Western powers have taken Libya and Iraq and Iraqi oil and Afghanistan, and they're fiddling around in Syria as well and destroying Syria, which they probably have done already, all because they wanted regime change. Why? If you want or claim to be the champions of freedom, leave them be to live their own lives, their own way, among their own people. They don't need America or Western Europe to sit on top of them and tell them what to do. Now we come to Ukraine and Russia. A friend of mine sent me this discussion between him and his wife. As they were going to bed, his wife said, Russia has no right to be in Ukraine. It's their business whether they want to join NATO or not. My friend said nothing. He just went into the kitchen, got out a kitchen knife, put it in his hands and lay down to sleep. That's when his wife got up and said, "How can you sleep with a knife in your hand? You might stick that knife into me during the night when you're asleep." Well, it's none of your business. It's my business whether I want to sleep with a knife or not. When she got up and again started at him, he said, "Look, now you understand. Is it my business to sleep with a knife in my hand when you're right next door? Now you understand how Russia feels. That when there's a knife stuck in your side, it's not funny. They can't sit still. They had to do something. And they had to do something because America and Western Europe were goading Ukraine to go further and further to provoke Russia into this. They don't blame Russia. They had to do something, especially when you got the Western powers on the southern flank. Any military strategist will tell you that. And this is exactly what you were hoping for. Now again, the moment Russia attacks, the Western media comes out and all your Western organizations come out. The Olympic Association, FIFA, UEFA, they exclude Russia from all their competitions. Why? Did they exclude the USA and the UK when they walked into Iraq? Did they exclude NATO countries when they walked into Libya and Afghanistan and loused up or messed up Syria thoroughly? No. Why? Is this not racism? Why? Because Russia is a Slav country, Slav origin country, and these others are Latino origin countries. Isn't this racism to the extreme? Especially when you consider the Olympic Association is the one that keeps telling every country, keep sport and politics separate. Do not let one interfere with the other. So why is the Olympic Association picking on Russia? Why is it interfering in politics? And why a FIFA? They never banned the UK or the US or any NATO countries from the World Cup. Then why is Russia being messed around with? I mean, you're breaking your own code and you don't think about it. Now we come back to the real reason. Why was Saddam Hussein attacked? And killed? He was murdered, let's face that. It was a kangaroo court, just like Mossadegh. Why was Libya and Gaddafi, why was he murdered? We go back to Nixon and Kissinger and the Saudi government, who said oil must only be traded in US dollars. Again, a dictatorship. Saddam Hussein had begun, he committed the unforgivable sin as far as the USA was concerned, because he started selling oil in euros and rubles. Gaddafi wanted a gold-based African currency to sell Libyan oil. Now, if you claim that everyone must have freedom, it is their right to sell to whom they want, in whatever currency they want. Who are you to put your diktat and your jackboot on other people? Why does the USA want to impose that? Because if oil starts being sold in other currencies, whereas today you have 75 to 77 rupees to the dollar, it'll come down to $10 for a rupee. US currency is just a piece of paper. It has no gold to back it. You'll have to come back to the gold standard, which you don't want, because it suits you not to pay back somebody in gold. Everybody else has to, but not the US. Now you begin to understand why the Western media has been demonizing Putin for so many years, because he has always advocated a basket of currencies for trading oil and gas. Currencies like the euro, the ruble, the yuan, and the rupee, even sterling. Why does it have to be the dollar only? Now you understand the real crux of all this. Plus, there is one other very sinister thing. The Americans already had Saudi oil in their pockets, thanks to Nixon and Kissinger. They now have colonized and taken over Iraqi oil, which is probably even bigger reserves than the Saudis. They have Kuwait, because the Kuwaiti royal family is frightened. If you remember, one of the excuses for Desert Storm 1, 1990, was Bush had invited, or he got his ambassador to tell Saddam Hussein personally that if you walk into Kuwait, we will treat it as an internal matter for Iraq. Which is like saying, please be my guest. Now, when they did that, and do remember that Kuwait should always have been a part of Iraq. It would be the only port facility which Iraq had. They have one oil pumping station in Basra, but that's not a port. Now we know why they walked into there. Add to that Libya. Gaddafi wanting a different currency, the unforgivable sin. Having done so much for Libya, he's called a tyrant. But nobody knows the truth about Libya, thanks to the Western press. I mean, many of these Western news companies or news stations, I mean West European, I also mean the US ones, they don't tell the truth. They're known liars. And yet we don't get anything else. We don't get the real truth. Now, until this continues, we're not going to have a world except they claim that Hitler's dream was world domination. It wasn't Hitler's dream. It was the American dream, with the strings being pulled by the Rothschilds. And why do they want no gold to back the US dollar? Because they print the US dollar, not the American government. They loan the US dollar to the government and charge interest for it. Added to that, the fact that as long as it is not backed by gold, they want to buy something, they just issue a check in US dollars. It has to go back through their banks, which means they pay for whatever they buy with a little piece of paper. There's no gold. There's no wealth being created, because if you sell something to them, you only get this piece of colored paper. Now you begin to understand what the New World Order is about. And they're a particularly nasty and dangerous bunch of people. I hope you begun to understand that it's not the Russians but the West that are misbehaving. Have been misbehaving for a long time. Please understand that. And think carefully before you come to a conclusion. Well, folks, many thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this one too. When you watch this one, see it with the other one. Then you begin to understand. You see part 1 and part 2. Then you begin to get the picture, the whole picture, rather than just a little part of it, and a little bit here and a little bit there. Put them all together and the jigsaw is complete. Thank you. If you like it, please watch it. Please subscribe. Send it on to your friends, their groups and your own group. Bye. See you next time.